People check into hotels for lots of different reasons. Whether it's for a wee holiday or for work, it's probably best not to think about those who came before you in whatever room you're staying in, or what's went on there in the past. This is especially true of the hotel president in Kansas City. Back in 1935, over the course of 2 days, a strange series of events would unfold, baffling investigators for nearly a century. Let's check in and check out the mystery of room 1046. It's 1935 in Kansas City, Missouri, within a small area called the Power and Lights District. At 1329 Baltimore Avenue lies the Hotel President. It was the crown jewels of the city. Just a few years earlier, it played host to the Republican National Convention in which Herbert Hoover was nominated for president. The hotel's drum room lounge was the place to be, and even welcomed famous entertainers like Frank Sinatra to perform there. On the afternoon of the 2nd of January in 1935, a man checked in under the name Roland T. Owen. The only information we have about this guy is that he was in his early 20s, had short brown hair, and had a scar on his head above his ear. Witnesses said he also had a visible cauliflower ear, which could have meant that he was involved in some sort of fighting, possibly a boxer or a wrestler. He also made mention that he was from Los Angeles. Mr. Owen had requested an interior room on one of the upper floors. He was given room 1046 up on the 10th floor. The bellboy on duty that day was Randolph Probst. He helped Mr. Owen to his room. On the elevator ride up, they exchanged small talk in which the new guest had mentioned that he was previously staying at the nearby Muehlbach Hotel, but had opted for a cheaper alternative. As they were politely chatting, the bellboy noticed something strange. Mr. Owen had little to no baggage. In fact, he was only carrying a hairbrush, a comb, and toothpaste, but no suitcases or bags. After the guest unpacked his belongings, which were the contents of his coat pocket, he and the bellboy both left the room. Probst locked the door and gave Owen the key, and they both took the elevator back down to the lobby, where he watched as Mr. Owen left the hotel. A short time later, one of the maids, Mary Soptic, entered room 1046 to routinely perform her cleaning duties. She was shocked to see Mr. Owen sitting in the dark, with the exception of one dim lamp, which barely illuminated the room. He encouraged the maid to carry on about her duties on the condition that she was quick about it, as he was expecting company very soon. Soptic would later tell authorities that the guest seemed either worried about something or afraid, and that he always wanted to kinda keep in the dark. The maid returned at around 4 p.m. in order to deliver clean towels. She said that she found the room in almost complete darkness again, and the guest was laying on the bed fully clothed. She was barely able to make him out laying there, but noticed two things. One was the fact that the door was unlocked, and two was a note that was left on the bedside table, which read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." On the 3rd of January, which was the next day, Soptic came back to tend to the room around 10:30 a.m. This time she noticed that the door had been locked from the outside. A fair assumption is to make that the occupant simply locked the door on his way out. However, when she entered, the shades were drawn, the room was almost in complete darkness again, as it was the night before, and Mr. Owen was sitting in the same position on the bed. This discovery meant that someone had locked the door from the outside. It's already a creepy scene, just something weird about it all, so you can imagine the maid getting a fright when suddenly Mr. Owen picked up the phone and Soptic overheard his side of the conversation.
"No, Don, I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. I just had breakfast."
The voice on the other side insisted, to which Owen replied,
"No, I'm not hungry."
The maid returned later that afternoon again to replenish towels and toiletries. This time, as she approached the room, she could hear two male voices inside. She knocked on the door and heard a rough male voice say,
"Who is it?"
The maid sheepishly replied that she had fresh towels for the room.
"We don't need any."
Even though Soptic knew that at that time there certainly were no towels in the room, as she had removed them all earlier for cleaning. During the night, a woman staying in room 1048 would complain to the hotel staff that she could hear male and female voices cursing loudly on the same floor, although there was reportedly a party going on that night within room 1055. So, like most large established hotels, especially back then, there were elevator operators. So let's say someone wanted the lift from the 10th floor, they would press the buzzer, the wee lift man would see it and take the lift up to them. They would say, "Lobby please," or wherever they wanted to go, and that was the guy's job. So on duty that night as elevator operator was Charles Blocker. He began his shift at midnight. He reported later that he was fairly busy up until around 1:30 AM. After that time, most of the hotel was fairly quiet and not much was doing, except for a loud party in room 1055, as I mentioned earlier. Blocker mentioned a woman visiting the hotel. She was a regular visitor to gentlemen callers, and so her reason for being in the hotel for late night visits was fairly clear to Blocker and the rest of the staff. She wasn't delivering food, that's for sure. In the wee hours of that morning, not long after he started his shift, Blocker got the woman on the lift and she requested to be dropped off on the 10th floor and asked him about room 1026. 5 minutes later, the elevator was summoned there again. It turned out to be the same woman who expressed puzzlement that her client was not in room 1046, since she said he had called her and on previous visits with him he had always been present. She remained on the floor after the conversation and Blocker took the lift back down to the lobby again. A half hour later, Blocker got another signal to take the elevator back to the 10th floor. The woman was waiting again and he took her down to the lobby. An hour later, he took her and a different man to the 9th floor. This was at 4:15 AM. A short time later, a call from that floor turned out to be the woman. He took her to the lobby and she left the hotel for the night. Another call from the 9th floor approximately 15 minutes later turned out to be the man who had come up with her. He told Blocker that he could not sleep and was going for a walk. Whether or not these events have anything to do with the events in 1046 are still not clear. Robert Lane, a city worker driving on 13th Street near Lydia Avenue, saw a man dressed in only an undershirt, pants and shoes run into his path and flag him down. When Lane stopped, the man apologised, saying that he had mistaken Lane's car for a taxi. The man asked Lane if he could possibly take him somewhere where he could get a taxi, to which Lane agreed. He noticed the man clutching his arm, which appeared to have a large wound. Lane commented to the man,
"You look like you've had it bad."
to which the man replied,
"I swear I could kill someone else tomorrow."
He drove to a nearby intersection at 12th Street and Troost Avenue. This is where taxis would park during the night to pick up fares. He later said that he saw the stranger getting into a cab and driving away out of sight. So far, things have been, well, strange, yeah, but nothing that would amount to a mystery almost a century in the making. But hang on. The next morning, the 4th, at around 7 AM, the hotel operator noticed that the phone inside room 1046 had been left off the hook for a long time and was not in use. She reported this, and the bellboy from earlier, Randolph Probst, was sent up to the room to investigate. Outside room 1046, Randolph noticed the Do Not Disturb sign hanging on the doorknob, but chose to knock anyway. A voice came from within the room.
"Come in, turn on the lights."
Probst tried to enter as the occupant requested, but the door was still locked. Despite the boy knocking several times again, there were no further responses from within, and no one had come to answer the door. So the bellboy shouted for whoever was inside the room to put the phone back on the hook, before leaving and returning to his duties. Around 90 minutes later, at 8:30 AM, the operator reported once again that the phone was still off the hook. She alerted the bellboys, and this time another lad called Harold Pike said that he would attend 1046 and see what was going on. He did so. He let himself into 1046. The drapes were pulled closed, still with the only light into the room being from the open door in which Pike had entered. He noticed that Owen was still in bed, naked and drunk. The phone stand had been knocked over, so he stood it back up and replaced the receiver back on the hook. He also noticed a dark area around Mr. Owen, like a stain on the sheets. Yeah, that's not going to be good. Sometime between 10:30 and 10:45 am, the phone once again was taken off the receiver and not in use, and once again a bellboy was sent to the room. The original lad, Randolph Probst, attended 10:46. This quote is taken from his police statement.
When I entered the room, this man was within 2 feet of the door, on his knees and elbows, holding his head in his hands. I noticed blood on his head. I then turned the light on. I looked around and saw blood on the walls, on the bed, and in the bathroom. This frightened me, and I immediately left the room and went downstairs.
Probst would head back up to the room with the hotel manager after contacting the police. They were soon joined by Dr. Flanders of the Kansas City General Hospital, where he sat Owen up on the edge of the bathtub. Owen was discovered to have extensive injuries. He had been tied up by a cord around his wrists, ankles and his neck. All evidence would suggest that he had been tortured. Blood had made its way across the wall and over the ceiling above the bed. He had been struck multiple times on the head, and his skull was fractured. He had also been stabbed several times in the chest and sustained a punctured lung. There were deep ligature marks around his neck, which suggested that he may have been strangled also. The doctor asked him what had happened here, to which he didn't give much information about. The doctor then asked Owen who was in the room with him, to which he replied,
Nobody.
Owen would explain away his injuries by insisting that he fell against the bathtub. After speaking briefly with the detective, he was loaded into an ambulance where he lost consciousness and was taken to the hospital. The doctor examining him said that he sustained his injuries 6 or 7 hours prior to being discovered. So this means that when they first went into his room to replace that phone, he had already suffered these horrific injuries and was bleeding out, which would account for the dark stain around his body. He was pronounced dead a little after midnight on the 5th of January. Detectives found no personal belongings or weapons in room 1046, which ruled out suicide. Detectives also checked with law enforcement back in LA. After all, Owen had mentioned whilst checking in that that's where he was from, but they were unable to trace anyone with the name Roland T. Owen. Word soon began to spread, and his name was released to the public in the hopes that someone would come forward and say that they knew the man, or maybe report Roland Owen as missing. But they got no responses. It would appear that no one, either in LA or Kansas City, knew who this man was. Detectives turned their attentions to the name Don, which was heard numerous times. It's also assumed that this Don person may have been the other voice that the maid heard through the door. However, this search also yielded nothing. Owen's body was held at a local funeral home, again in the hopes that someone would show up, maybe a relative or a friend, but again, no one would show. Well, not no one. Remember the driver that picked up the stranger in his shirt and underpants? Well, he went to view the body and saw the same injury on Owens that he saw on the man, which he reported to the police. It was later announced that he would be buried in a potter's field. The mystery would deepen when the funeral home received an anonymous call from someone wanting to pay for a proper burial. On March 23rd, a stack of cash bundled in a newspaper was left anonymously at the funeral home. A flower arrangement was also paid for by this anonymous person. The flowers came with a card attached. The card simply read, "Love forever, Louise." Over a year later, in 1936, a publication called American Weekly published the story of Ronald T. Owen, a story which was picked up and read by a woman. This woman had a friend who she rushed to show the story to. Her friend went by the name Ruby Ogletree. Once she looked at the magazine article, Ruby identified the picture as her son, who had left Birmingham, Alabama in 1934. Ronald T. Owen was actually Artemis Ogletree, and he was only 17 years old at the time. In the spring of 1935, Ruby Ogletree had received 3 letters from Artemis, 2 of which were purported to be from Egypt. The strange thing here was that the letters were all typed and sent after the death of Roland Owen. A newspaper article around that time covering this case reported that Artemis Ogletree didn't know how to type, and that the content was slangy and unfamiliar to Ruby Ogletree. It was later revealed that around the same time, Artemis Ogletree had stayed at another hotel in Kansas City called the St. Regis. But he wasn't alone. He had stayed with another man. Could this be Don? In the early 2000s, a historian at the Kansas City Public Library authored an account of this murder case. He had received a call from someone out of state who said that they had been helping to inventory the belongings of an elderly person who had recently passed away. Among those was a shoebox which turned out to be filled with newspaper clippings related to the case, as well as, according to them, one item mentioned in the newspaper stories. The caller identified neither themselves nor the item. Horner did not make this public until the conclusion of the second of two posts he made on the library's blog retelling the story in 2012. Although I've been digging through these blog posts and I can't find where he gave any such revelation. I found the story, sure, but not the identity of this mysterious caller. Maybe this was the earliest example of clickbait. So let's have a wee look at some theories. The first and obvious theory was that the mysterious Dawn had done this to Ogletree. It's just strange to me that Dawn could have been coming and going from the hotel's 10th floor and even room 1046 without anyone putting eyes on him to give a possible description. The second theory is that the working girl who came in and was later joined by an unknown man was responsible. It's thought that the man could have been Dawn, and that when the woman was originally looking for room 1026, she was actually meaning 1046. The third theory is an interesting one. Remember a woman in 1048 heard loud shouting and cursing from both male and female voices. So what if the voices she was hearing was Dawn and another woman? Several sources say that Ogletree was killed for being unfaithful. So let's have a look at that for a wee second. So a newspaper called the Newcastle Sun published a story titled Mystery Murder in Room 1046. The sequence of events quoted in that publication was slightly different. So remember there was a newspaper announcement saying that Roland T. Owen would be buried in a potter's field. Well, it was reported that an unknown woman called a local paper and said, "You have a story in your paper that is wrong. Roland Owen will not be buried in a pauper's grave. Arrangements have been made for his funeral." When the recipient of the call asked her to identify herself and what she knew about this case, she replied, "Never mind, I know what I'm talking about. He got into a jam." She then hung up the phone. Around the same time, a call was placed to the funeral home where his body lay. This time it was a male voice saying, "Don't bury Owen in a pauper's grave. I want you to bury him in Memorial Cemetery. Then he will be near my sister. I'll send funds to cover the funeral expenses." So apparently the caller went on to explain that Roland T. Owen was cheating on his fiancée and that this man and the fiancée attended room 1046 and had a little meeting with Owen. Before he hung up on the call, he said, "Cheaters usually get what's coming to them." Yeah, I've gave up on the American accents. Probably best. This was when the florist got a call and the order was placed for the flowers. They placed an order for 13 American Beauty roses to be sent to Roland Owen's funeral. The man on the phone had said that he was doing this for his sister. I'm guessing all of this was just conjecture and poor reporting because, as far as I can tell, either none of these reports were followed up by detectives, or they were and led to dead ends. However, I have an interesting theory. Remember the woman that complained about the noise? She was booked into room 1048, right? Right next door to room 1046. She arrived about 6 p.m. that night. During a conversation with staff there, she had said that she was feeling sick after a day of shopping. She decided to check into the hotel for a night instead of driving home. So for me, that's strange. But it was the 30s in Kansas City. Maybe that was the done thing, I don't know. But here's the strange thing about this woman. She was visited at the hotel by her boyfriend, who was a florist in the city. He supposedly left around 9:20 p.m. that same night. Her name was Jean Owen. Coincidence or what? She was interviewed by police, as was her boyfriend, but both were released. To me, that just seems so strange. When I was researching this, I actually thought that maybe Roland T. Owen wasn't actually Ogletree, and that's a different mystery altogether. Either way, whether his name was Ogletree or Owen, my initial thoughts were this: he was in a relationship or engaged, or not, to a woman whose name we do not know, but he was cheating on her with a man named Don. This type of relationship being frowned upon in the 30s, and the fact that he was cheating, would mean it would all need to be done in secret. On a separate occasion at an earlier time, he would meet Don at the St. Regis. The night before he arrived at the President Hotel, he and Don would meet again, but this time at the Muleback Hotel, where Owen would tell him that he just can't do this anymore, and he felt guilty about cheating, etc. They get into a fight and Owen leaves the hotel angry. He then goes to the President Hotel, and of course, because he's left all of his stuff in the room with Don, he was only able to gather up his comb, brush and toothpaste before he stormed out. Or maybe he didn't, and he actually stopped at a local store and bought these things shortly before arriving at the President. So then Don would find out where he was staying and try and call him, maybe saying that he just wanted to talk, just to sort this out. Maybe they could meet and have breakfast and work things out, to which Owen was heard saying that he wasn't hungry and didn't want to talk. Maybe he eventually agreed, and that was who he was talking about when he told the maid that he was expecting company. Maybe the visit didn't go as planned, and this is when Don killed him. These are just my thoughts. An interesting case for sure, and sadly, probably one that will remain a mystery. Thanks again folks for spending the time to watch this video. Every view, like or comment made really makes all the difference to me. So listen, stay safe out there please, tell someone you love them, and remember, keep smiling.